Season 2 has just wrapped, and boy, has a lot happened. Although this season has been a short one compared to Season 1, the season just gone was also packed with lore. If you've been keeping up with my videos, you'll know that there's only really been 3 videos that I did on the Season 2 updates, but still wanted to condense them all into a longer video, like I did with the Season 1 video. Season 2 saw us get a new trial environment, downtown, a new deluxe catalogue full of cosmetics to unlock, additional MK challenges, the Amelia story arc, 5 motion comics, a new X-Pop called The Picture, a new rig called The Jammer, new amps provided by Doris, and the program's Winter Kills 2.0, Under Surveillance, and of course last week's Escape event, and another comic book, which of course brought Season 2 to a close. Finally, before we jump into the lore, please be aware that I'll be jumping back at points and referring to relevant things from Season 1, so I guess it'll be safer to say at this point that there will be spoilers in this video for the entire Outlast series. Let's begin with a recap of what happened in Season 1. Right, so during the tensions of the Cold War, the CIA were concerned that the Soviets had made significant progress in the area of mind control, so naturally, they wanted to explore this themselves and beat the Soviets to the punch, so to speak. Enter the Murkoff Corporation. Murkoff had been working with what was formerly the CIA, called the OSS, and when the new agency formed, Murkoff essentially blackmailed the CIA into bringing them on board for any new operations. At some point in 1954, a scientist studying the field of thought reform named Dr. Hendrik Joliet Easterman has come back from Hong Kong after trying to find out the nature of his brother Stanley's death, as he believes Stanley was manipulated into ending himself as a result of brainwashing during the Korean War. Long story short, Easterman is kind of forced to work for Murkoff and he meets Dr. Rudolf Wernicke, a German scientist studying dream therapy, before being taken to Sinyala, located in the Arizona desert. Also recruited as an architect, Moses Scarfiotti, recommended by CIA Director Alan Welsh Dulles, and Scarfiotti would design what are called the trial environments. Setting up and using charitable outreach centres in order to lure people in that society would not miss or notice were gone, these victims were placed into the trials and were subjected to some pretty horrific stuff. Easterman had an obsession with charismatic aura and had an employee of Murkoff called Clyde Perry recruit what are called prime assets, exceptionally charismatic individuals who would be able to hold sway over others. This was the first iteration of Project Lathe, which stood for limbic aggression therapy. Unfortunately for Dr. Easterman, this was shut down on account of the high number of casualties, and the board were concerned that this was essentially just a massacre, with no scientific advancement attached to it. Easterman was paranoid that Moses Scarfiotti and another high-level Murkoff member of staff named Alice Avellanos were trying to sabotage him. So, Easterman needed to come up with something quick to present to the board, or he was toast. Waste not, want not, and Easterman repurposed the now psychologically damaged previous subjects, renaming them as a group to the Experimental Population, or X-Pop for short, and they would be under the control of the prime assets. Project Lathe version 2 would then begin. New subjects would still be recruited through the outreach centres, but they would be named reagents and would be kept in a sleep room area whilst they were not in a trial, with their very own room. They would be outfitted with night vision goggles which were attached, rather painfully, to their heads, and ESOP units which would hold a rig, which would allow the reagents some form of aid in the trials, such as stunning an enemy or seeing through walls with the X-ray rig. These ESOPs were maintained by an ex-army engineer kept there against his will by the name of Cornelius Noakes.
I was in the Battle of Attu against the Japanese. I tell you that? Craziest shit I ever seen. They charged us with swords.
Prescriptions could be purchased from the pharmacy, which the nurse Emily Barlow provided, in exchange for green Murkoff tokens. And finally there's Doris Ritter, a reagent who provides amps, items and skills, which again allow the reagents perks to use inside the trials. Doris doesn't take part in trials anymore thanks to agreements with some of the staff there at Sinyala. Through the time Lathe 2 is underway, reagents, through the trauma they experienced, would start to manifest an entity known as the Skinner Man, who many scientists and researchers considered to be a representation of Dr. Easterman. As a result, Easterman, shocked that his patients, whom he respected and who apparently loved him back, would withdraw himself from being so involved in the therapy and would present himself almost as a godlike, mysterious figure. Over time, many programs were introduced into the trials, such as Program Geister, where the reagent would hallucinate, which resulted in a much higher Skinner Man presence, toxic shock, in which a doctor from Unit 731, Dr. Kusamura, would work with Murkoff, although the purpose of these trials is not yet clear, and winter kills, in which reagents had to endure harsh cold in the trials to prepare them for operating during a nuclear winter. Such was the fear of nuclear war breaking out at this time. Prime Time was introduced, which saw multiple prime assets inserted into a single trial environment, and Project Countdown, which saw remote bombs attached to the reagents' chests, which they would extend with timers, and if not, reagents would gradually be released. Some were ineffective, dangerous, and had to be put down by Clyde Perry, who was observing them, but some were a little more effective, such as 0877, who is thought but not confirmed to be Simon Peacock, and 1616, who is Sullivan Noth. These reagents would be activated through a trigger phrase, which led to many reagents either dying attempting to achieve their given tasks or succeeding. These clandestine operations were to further the goals of the CIA in other parts of the world in an attempt to weaken the USSR. It wasn't all without drama though, as a significant amount of stuff was going on at Sinyala, with Easterman being poisoned with thallium at the New Year's party, which led to his hair falling out, Alice Avianos starting an affair with Murkoff's CIA liaison Jameson Lawler, and Easterman also finding out he'd divorced his wife Irene 6 months prior, despite not having any memory of this. Easterman has slowly been unravelling, but he would really start to unravel when someone called Amelia showed up. Firstly, there was Egregore, where a female reagent known only by their number 1733 was found carving 8 words into a corpse in the trial environments, and those 8 words spelled out the word Egregore, another term for a collective consciousness. This reagent was then severely beaten by X-Pops. Upon interrogation, this reagent, before she died from her injuries, cried and said, "I'm sorry, Amelia." This wasn't the first time Murkoff had heard of the name Amelia. Escalation therapy was then introduced, compounded trauma, trial after trial with no rest, increasing in danger. The new shuttle switching system was deemed a security threat by Moses Scarfiotti, but Easterman approved it anyway. Things then heated up even more as Amelia went into one of the trials with 3 other reagents during Project Countdown and escaped. At first, Murkoff thought she'd been blown up, but it soon became clear that they had an escapee on their hands, given that they had discovered an unconscious pusher without his gas mask in the dock's trial environment and no additional corpses in there. They also found footprints by an X-Pop insertion gate and signs of vandalism, with mechanical and electrical components missing. Around 4 days after Amelia's escape, she was in the walls, getting to work in planning her revolt. She would tamper with radios which would play messages of support and encouragement, informing fellow reagents that she had gotten out. The radio in the reagent's room also featured messages from Amelia, but this is something that was quickly fixed.
"You should see what's behind these walls. You haven't seen the worst of this place. Not by a long shot. This place is hell. But it's hell built by the cheapest bidder. There's cracks everywhere."
There may have been a radio malfunction. You need to ignore anything you heard. Outside voices are liars. You have to trust the voice of your conscience, the voice of your faith. You have to trust my voice.
Amelia would also start scrawling messages on the walls of the trial environments. Whatever she was doing, it was working, and Murkoff were flapping. Easterman was nervous, as he could only imagine what the board would do if they found out someone had escaped the confines of a trial environment. But that's a brief rundown of Season 1. Let's get into Season 2. So let's get these documents out the way first. So way back on November 26, 1959, Clyde Perry was questioning Cornelius Noakes about the missing Night Hunter file, with Noakes stating that he wanted the specs for the Night Hunter's goggles, but the file eventually did turn up. So the Night Hunter's archetype is that he was actually a military volunteer, but that due to his augmented vision he's become rather deluded, believing that he may even be a mythical figure, and a nocturnal hunter, hence the term Night Hunter. Now we get into the information that Noakes was interested in, the tech that is attached to not only his head, but to his eyes as well. The technology is based upon Nazi Germany World War II tech known as a Wunderwaffe, which essentially means wonder weapon. There were a number of these Wunderwaffes created during World War II, and some of them were straight up terrifying. In terms of this though, the night vision goggles he uses are based off Zilgerat 1229, also called Vampire. It was initially designed as an infrared device developed for the Wehrmacht, and their Sturmgewehr 44 assault rifles intended for, you guessed it, combat at night. It wasn't really very practical though, as the soldier using it would be encumbered with massive packs and batteries in order to power the thing, and its fragility meant that in a gunfight it would be impractical to use. You'll notice that the black searchlight is what is attached to the Night Hunter's chest. Since this development came late into World War II, this Wunderwaffe never made it to the army trial phase. In the Night Hunter file, it states that the technology used for the Night Hunter was developed in cooperation with Aribert Heim, an Austrian SS doctor, a Nazi who was, well, this guy was evil. Like, really, really evil. Heim was known by patients and prisoners at the Mauthausen concentration camp as Dr. Death. He would kill and torture inmates, a lot of the time for no reason at all. One patient, an 18-year-old man, went in to see him for treatment for an inflamed foot, and he mutilated the guy. I'll omit the grisliest details, but he then, it's told, boiled his head, stripped the skin off of it, and used the skull as a paperweight for his desk, although he claimed he wanted the skull for its perfect teeth. He also committed atrocities such as injecting various chemicals into the hearts of prisoners, including petrol, poisons, and water to see how they would die. He was eventually captured and taken as a POW by US forces in 1945, but was released and found work as a gynecologist in Baden-Baden in 1947. He disappeared in 1962 after an international warrant was issued for his arrest, as he was deemed a Nazi war criminal. He ran away to Egypt and later died from suspected rectal cancer in 1992. But let's look at the work Heim did on the Night Hunters before they arrived at Signala. For their preconditioning, Heim would immobilize the eyeballs of the subject with pins through the sclera, which is the white part of the eye and has 4 layers. These pins are inserted into the sclera until the eye muscles would atrophy. This is so undisturbed stimulation can be applied to the retina itself. Since the Night Hunter needs to move the whole head and can't move the eyes, autopsies on the deceased Night Hunter showed that the colliculi were enlarged. The colliculi is part of the midbrain that processes sensory information. As for his Slavic background, well, many in the community thought that the Night Hunter may be a captured prisoner of war, but this is not the case. The file mentions the Night Hunter potentially having been in contact with a now dead scientist in Murkoff's research and development team who filled the Night Hunter's head with German fairy tales, or Teutonic tales. Finally, the Night Hunter's night vision is quite similar to the night vision used by the reagents. Despite this, the Night Hunter still has a significant advantage, and it's thought that this is down to the Night Hunter developing a sort of immune response in the visual cortex. This was mentioned as being unexpected. But now let's move on to the other X-Pop, Pitchers, also known as Molotovs. So this X-Pop is described as a shaman, to a pagan god of fire, seeing the advancements of weaponry such as flamethrowers as evidence of a god of fire existing. Their name comes from the fact that the Murkoff staff had instructed them to create firebombs. Therefore, this X-Pop will carry a tank of gasoline. They spit flame through their face mask, which has a nozzle, and is specifically designed to prevent them from actually ingesting the fuel. They cannot speak as they have severely damaged larynxes from ingesting gasoline. According to notes on their interviews, these subjects are obsessed and fascinated by the use of napalm in war. Korea and Japan are a couple of examples, and they are all thought to be responsible for many, many deaths during war. Finally, it's noted that they not only serve fire, but they command it too, and they hate human contact. But that's all we've got on the picture, and we've now covered all the Season 2 X-Pop files. During Season 2's Project Breach update, we also got a new ending, or conclusion, and this one was centered around the goings-on in the Democratic Republic of Congo. During the period of European colonization in Africa, Belgium had taken control of the Democratic Republic of Congo, with it being known as the Belgian Congo. During the 40s and 50s, the country's uranium-rich resources would be used by the US in bombs during World War II, specifically during the Manhattan Project. This led to heavy interest from the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. In the late 1950s, nationalist movements were demanding an end to Belgian rule as they wanted independence. The Belgian government responded by getting the ball rolling on independence for Congo. There were actually many nationalist parties during this time. It's a pretty complicated history, but the two main parties were the ABACO and the MNC. The two names are significant, and those are Patrice Lumumba of the MNC, who had great disdain for Belgium, and the leader of ABACO, Joseph Kasavubu. As neither side had won an absolute majority in the elections, Lumumba would be elected Prime Minister, and Kasavubu was elected President. Anyway, a single state was to be created, and this state was to be governed from Leopoldville, which is now called Kinshasa. Fighting would break out during elections and a mutiny would break out, with the Congolese armed police fighting their Belgian officers as they demanded increased pay and the removal of white officers. This meant that many of these soldiers moved towards Lumumba and his cause. During this fighting, a man named Moist Shombe, who led the Konakat party, had declared one of the country's provinces, Katanga, independent and was supported by the Belgians. Lumumba and Kasavubu got help from the UN, who sent UN soldiers to Katanga. From the period of 1960 to 1961, the Congo crisis was in full swing, and this was a period of civil war. But really, this was a proxy war between the United States and the Soviets, as they were both supporting opposing sides. And what came next was messy. President Kasavubu, under pressure from the West, tried to purge the government of any radical elements, and that of course included Lumumba, who he had accused of being a communist. This was orchestrated by the West due to their interest in the Congolese diamond mines. Lumumba, who was supported by the Soviet Union and the communist nations, was an obstacle to that. Lumumba then responded by firing Kasavubu, with both parties claiming that they were the legal central government. Chief of Staff of the army at the time was Joseph Mobutu, and he staged a coup d'etat, ousting both Lumumba and Kasavubu, and Mobutu was supported by the US and the West. Mobutu would hand Lumumba over to Moist Shombe, and Lumumba would end up being executed by the Katangan rebels. But back to the ending.
Американский агент, сука, ты где? Покажи себя, а то вы все сдохнете. Переведи им быстро. У тебя 2 секунды. 1, 2.
Who is the spy?
Спроси, сука, у них, как они доставят яд. Как они выйдут на Лумумбу?
Where is the poison? How would you find a mother?
Спроси, что значат эти слова? Паук, глаз, ягненок.
What does this mean? Spider, eye, lamp.
In this ending, we see 4 men with sacks over their heads, on their knees, somewhere in the jungles of Congo. A Soviet soldier, speaking Russian, demands for the American to show themselves, and that they have 2 seconds to do so. One of the men is then executed. One panics and tries to run off, but is then shot. One of the soldiers then mentions poison, and the reagent could have been carrying the heroin produced in the heroin refinery at Signala. He also mentions Patrice Lumumba, and I think he asks, "How did you find Lumumba?" One of the Congolese soldiers reads something and asks what the words spider, eye, and lamb mean. With the trigger words now activating the reagent's conditioning, things change. The reagent sees someone walk out from behind a vehicle. It's the Skinner Man. The Skinner Man gets down on hands and knees and crawls towards the reagent. The reagent then blacks out and comes to, having killed all of the soldiers there. Getting up and slightly confused, the reagent sees some sort of facility behind them, along with a pit full of bodies. Before the reagent can do anything else, they are shot and killed. I'm not entirely sure what the reagent was doing there, but it's most likely that they were there during the period of unrest. I'm sure that we'll get some more context behind this conclusion and why the reagent was there, and if they succeeded in their task or not. So remember I mentioned reagent 1733 earlier, the one who was carving the word egregore into a body? Well, desperate to find out more about this Amelia, Alice Bradley Avellanos went to the archives and requested minutes which detailed a conversation between 1733 and a Murkoff scientist, and this conversation took place around 6 months before 1733 was killed. 1733 was asked about the therapy and how it's affecting her. She replies that she's been expressing herself and she's written a poem. The word regret was written, and upon being asked about it, 1733 replied that regret is a good thing, that if you've got regrets, then you've got free will to make a different choice. 1733 says that it's her friend that told her that. Being asked her friend's name, 1733 repeats that they don't have names there, only numbers. And after realizing that the Murkoff scientist was about to torture that information out of her, she panicked and told the scientist that the friend's name was Amelia. The conversation doesn't end there. 1733 begs the scientist not to tell anyone that she told, and he tells her about doctor-patient confidentiality and that it's sacred. The scientist tells 1733 to tell him what the word greed means to her. She replies, weakness. That if you know what somebody is greedy for, then you know how to beat them. She says that Amelia got that from Jesus and Gandhi. Asking about the last word, everyone, the scientist again asks 1733 to tell him what Amelia said about it. 1733 simply replies and asks if the scientist knows of the story of Moses. That Moses could have just saved himself, but he saved everybody. But back to the present. The day after retrieving the notes from this conversation, Avianos had a conversation with Easterman and told him about the fact that this reagent mentioned the name Amelia. Easterman seems to be frantic about the situation, so much so that Avianos asks him when he last slept. But Easterman is really fixated on the fact that 1733 said the name Moses. They're talking about questioning someone, but they have to be discreet, that this person has connections within Signala, such as Scarfiotti and others, implying that she has connections with many important people in the facility. That someone is Doris Ritter, the shadowy dame.
I got a system. Keeps me out of the trials. Business relationships. Some of these poor schmucks on the Murkoff tick got problems of their own or things they need.
Avianos says to send Director of Historical Refinement Clyde Perry to speak with her. So I mentioned him earlier, but Clyde Perry's previous title was Murkoff Collections Agent, and as mentioned earlier, he would observe the release reagents, reporting on their behaviour and cleaning up any resulting mess. And he would find and interview the potential prime assets. On one of these trips, he would get the living daylights beaten out of him by Franco Barbie, and his injuries were so bad that he would be out of action for a bit and had to retire, but he then got a new job as the Director of Historical Refinement. He was to get any leaks or potential security breaches under control. One of his main jobs has been to figure out why loads of sensitive Murkoff documents are making their way into the trials and to find out who is responsible for it. Anyway, Easterman has a meeting with Clyde Perry, and that very same day, Easterman says to scare her, but not to hurt her. Upon Clyde's initial digging, a name came up. Someone that we've heard Doris talk about through conversation.
This friend I had, Henrietta. We're gonna get out of here together. But then something changed. Little by little, this person I'm risking my life for, something's different. What fucks me up about it, I don't know if she changed or I did. I guess Henrietta got out one way or the other.
Thinking that Doris's romantic relationship with Henrietta could be something to use in order to get her to talk about Amelia, Easterman says that it will not work, as Easterman claims that this Henrietta is very dead. After this conversation, Clyde had Henrietta's records retrieved from the archives. Henrietta Grubbs had died in March 1959. Her participation in the trials had decreased, and this was seen as one of the benefits of her relationship with Doris. This led to the scientists giving her hormone and sleep therapy, and during one trial she was badly injured, suffering 17 fractures including her skull, a ruptured spleen, a collapsed lung, and internal bleeding. Despite this, she survived and was subjected to a hormone bath, along with bone extension, and was thrown into X-Pop classification, becoming a heavy X-Pop. This didn't have the desired effect, as her relationship with Doris had a large effect on her psyche. Unlike the other X-Pops, she was not swayed by the charisma of the prime assets, and sustained fatal injuries after she tried to attack Coil. She was presumed dead after being loaded onto a biohazard disposal shuttle, and her file was closed. But is Henrietta somehow still alive? So Clyde goes to have his conversation with Doris, and this is where part 1 of the comic book Murkoff Collection Volume 4 comes in. With Doris sat at a table, smoking, the place suddenly clears. Clyde walks in, who Doris has never met, and Doris instantly knows that this is bad news. She states that she's not going to tell him anything, but Clyde responds that that's fine, because he's not the one who is going to convince her. Clyde comments on how Doris hasn't seen the inside of a trial environment for years, and attributes that to her system that she's set up, a system of bribes, threats, and blackmail. One problem for her, though, is that she's got nothing on Clyde. He states that he's new there, and he appears to have a completely feral man there ready to attack Doris. With the feral man trying to bite her, Doris is asked who Amelia is, and almost instantly she says that Amelia's last name is Collier. Doris says that she went there to look for her boyfriend. Amelia, whose test results for the Stroop and aptitude test were marked as exceptional, is the daughter of a pimp and a prostitute. Both of her parents died when she was young, and she got arrested a few times for fraud and car theft. Remember, Murkoff set up those charity outreach centers to try and trick vulnerable people into signing up for the trials? Well, she went to one of those, but bizarrely, she had 2 sets of papers. She went twice. The first time, she left halfway through the interview after asking questions about another sign-up, a Damon Green. But the second time, she'd gone back and got sent to Signala. After having his conversation with Doris, Clyde wrote to Easterman. He said that he would prefer to meet to discuss things, as communicating via memos is not secure. He tells Easterman that he has a strong lead on the leak, and then they should meet up soon. Perry and Avianos meet. They convey their concern about Easterman. He mentions Amelia's full name to Avianos, and he hands her some papers and tells her to hold on to them. He's clearly very concerned about more material not only getting into the trials, but for someone to be able to escape the facility with that very sensitive information. Telling her about Damon Green and his affiliation with Amelia, Avianos tells Clyde to go and speak with him, and for him not to be gentle. One interesting thing that Clyde says is the term goat rope to describe Easterman, which is a term used by US Marines, and describes a chaotic or messy situation. This may give us a small glimpse into Clyde's background, with him potentially being a former Marine. After getting the file on Damon Green, Clyde sits down with him for an interview and begins by mentioning Amelia's name to him. He tells Damon that Amelia is there at Signala and demands to know everything that he knows about her. But Damon, in tears, well, he's not going to tell Clyde anything. He knows what's about to happen. As Clyde gets ready to torture him, Damon warns him that once Amelia sets her mind to do something, there's nothing that anyone can do about it, and he says that she will tear Signala to the ground. He says he wouldn't be surprised if she's watching them. This only causes Clyde to test that by piercing Damon's eye to see if she reveals herself. But she doesn't, and Clyde continues to test that by mutilating Damon and killing him. He turns the tape recorder off and gives the tape to Easterman. Clyde's mess and Damon's body is cleaned up by disgruntled Murkoff cleanup staff and loaded onto a waste disposal shuttle whilst Easterman listens to the tape. Damon is disposed of into a mess of deceased and decaying bodies, and someone wades through the bloody mess. It's Amelia. She spots Damon, and she's furious. Amelia's preparation for her plan is laid out in 5 motion comics. In comic 1, Amelia is underneath Signala in the old biohazard disposal facility. She seems to have retrieved 2 halves of a piece of machinery with the writing Part 148 on them. The machine that she's checking out is broken. There's no one down here at all, as Murkoff have since switched to a different biohazard disposal method. She's looking at something Murkoff used to harvest the equipment from reagents so that they could use it on new ones. It's called the REH, or the Reagent Equipment Harvester. In Comic 2, Noakes is playing his part. He's doing his usual job, fixing ESOPs and holding a note. On the note, Part 148 is written. This is a message direct from Amelia to Noakes. He places a new unbroken part inside an ESOP, and a reagent stands there waiting, ready to do his part and to take something into the trial environment for Amelia so that she can carry out whatever her plan is. Noakes feels a bit better now that he's helping and feels that the reagents are not just throwing their lives away, and he hands the ESOP over to the reagent. In Comic 3, however, Clyde is still hunting Amelia. He makes a comment about him being Torquemada's janitor. For reference, Torquemada Torquemada was a Roman Catholic Dominican friar during the Spanish Inquisition. He approved of some barbaric methods of torture and is thought to have facilitated around 2,000 burnings at the stake. He's comparing Murkoff to Torquemada, and that he is cleaning up their mess, essentially. He says that torture victims scratch marks on the wall, tallying their days. However, he spots a tally on the wall and realises that this is not a tally at all, it's a countdown. In Comic 4, Mother Gooseberry is undertaking her usual shenanigans, introducing Dr. Futterman to the poor reagents, stating that they have to save the children, and she sees Amelia. She has grabbed one of her children and is running with it under her arm. Gooseberry states something about the rules being broken, and she witnesses Amelia breaking the rules by using an insertion gate meant for X-Pops. Gooseberry considered that the rules may have changed, but what this means for Gooseberry, well, I'm not sure, but I'm excited to find out in future. And finally, in Comic 5, we see Amelia placing the child she took into a contraption, and this inflicts heavy damage upon it. She's clearly fixed the machinery with the part Noakes sent to her, and she is looking to see if escaping via this machine is a viable way out. Given the state of the doll, this is why she says that this is going to hurt. It's not long until Amelia's plan is to happen. Earlier I mentioned the toxic shock trials, and you'll remember that in January of 1960, we're currently in April 1960 for reference, one of the doctors from Unit 731, Jun Kusamura, who was brought to the US under paperclip, was brought in for the toxic shock program on the recommendation of MKUltra director Sidney Gottlieb for Kusamura's guidance on a toxic chemical being sprayed into the trial environments. Kusamura worked between Signala and Los Alamos. He was shown as being inspired by Dr. Wernicke and his experiments into dream therapy. Anyway, in newly leaked documents, Kusamura wrote to Dr. Easterman on the 17th of April 1960 and told him that after 2 toxic shock programs inspired by consultants from a certain company, Kress Chemical, he recommended that Murkoff request more materials from Kress Chemical, clearly delighted with the results that the toxic shock program had produced. But Easterman would not respond. So incommunicado essentially means not in contact. Due to Easterman's need for control, he wanted to find Amelia quickly as he felt that he was losing control. He's still very cautious about who to trust and doesn't even trust Clyde Perry, but then again I wouldn't trust Clyde either, to be fair. Then Easterman writes about Scarfiotti. Remember that Easterman and Scarfiotti absolutely despise one another. Ever since the first iteration of Trials, called Lathe 1, failed back in 1958, Easterman had suspected Scarfiotti of trying to sabotage him. This, along with 1733 mentioning the name Moses, leads Easterman to a theory. His writings on Moses in this entry of his journal show some pretty dark musings going on in Easterman's head, with him thinking that Scarfiotti is conspiring with Amelia in order to try and destroy him. Meanwhile, Easterman's issue is developing, as he's now seeing tendrils. This makes Easterman say that he's not going to look in the mirror again. But Easterman is about to find something out that will shake him to his core. So remember the documents were being leaked into the trials and that Clyde was trying to find out who the leak was? Well, on the 17th of April, Easterman sent a memo out stating that any and all documentation found in the trial environments were to be carbon copied to him, especially documents from and to Scarfiotti, Avellanos and Perry. So this means that he's going to read everything that his colleagues have been saying about him. But this isn't what concerned him. What concerned him were documents regarding his brother Stanley. One document detailed a conversation between Murkoff's CIA liaison Jameson Lawler and Alice Avellanos back in October 1955, about a year and a half after Easterman had joined the Murkoff Corporation, and they were talking about Stanley. Lawler discusses them having encountered a potential wrinkle, Stanley's side. Well, it turns out that Easterman's belief that Stanley was manipulated into killing himself as a result of Korean brainwashing during the war directly influenced Easterman's interest into programming the human mind.
Dr. Easterman was so upset by the news he heard out of Korea. Some of our boys came back changed, like they were different people. And Easterman thought, well, if you can change people for the worse, why couldn't you change them for the better?
What Easterman also didn't know until now was that Stanley wasn't even a soldier in the Korean War. He never even stepped foot in Korea because he was an accountant for the Quartermaster Corps. Essentially, the Quartermaster Corps is responsible for the development and acquisition of general supplies, mortuary affairs and other duties in order to provide combat support to the US Army. Lawler states that Stanley had probably been embellishing slightly in his letters when he wrote home. The consensus is that Easterman needs to keep believing that his brother died as a result of self-inflicted means due to brainwashing, as that will make him more efficient in his job, I guess. They went on to state that as part of Murkoff's background checks, they'd found out that Stanley had attempted to end himself on 2 prior occasions, but Easterman did not know that. They describe Easterman's home life, that their mother was not exactly stable herself. Medical records showed that Mother Easterman was pulling out her children's hair, and this resulted in acute localized alopecia, which magically disappeared once they left home. But back in the present day, Easterman, naturally, does not believe a word of it. He shows incredible denial about what he's just read, thinking it's all fabricated and that Stanley was indeed driven to end himself. He is insistent that the therapy works. It's also noted that he was drawing dandelions on the page while scribbling down these words too. Easterman then proceeds to barricade himself in his office. Due to Easterman not responding to Kusamura's letter, Kusamura had become concerned. In a conversation with Kusamura and his translator, Avellanos states that chemical testing has halted for now as they have bigger fish to fry, which of course is Amelia and the subsequent uprising that she's been planning. Kusamura seems to think that with chemical testing there's an opportunity for additional funding from Los Alamos, but again the translator is stonewalled by Avellanos, who is more concerned about the security breach there at the facility. The same day, Avianos is speaking with Clyde Perry, and after mentioning Easterman's stable diet of gin and amphetamines, their conversation ends with Perry suggesting that Easterman take an enforced vacation. She tells Perry that they need to tell Scarfiotti about what's been happening in regards to Amelia and her escape, as he thinks the breach only amounts to some broken radios having been found inside the trials. So, Avianos and Perry speak with Moses Scarfiotti about the breach. Perry mentions that he thinks someone internal is helping Amelia, and Scarfiotti is very worried that they suspect that it's him. They ease his fears, and Perry says that he's got a lead on who is responsible. Moses asks who Amelia is, and Perry says that she's a nobody, someone that got lucky. Scarfiotti naturally tries to suggest that this is all Easterman's fault, and Avianos mentions additional security being needed inside the trials, and Scarfiotti recommends security cameras. He says that this would prevent an increase in manpower, or security, and people wouldn't need to watch the monitors, as the cameras would administer an electric shock through the reagent's ESOP units. This would be enough to knock them down or attract attention. This, they hope, would help them identify and capture Amelia. Avianos talks about wanting to make an example out of her, but Scarfiotti wonders if Amelia is still wearing an ESOP. Avianos poses the question of how she would get it off, unless she has a bone saw or a wrench. Nonetheless, the under surveillance program is authorized for use in the trials. We got one additional, pretty interesting document which talks about the psychosis gas which is pumped into the trial shuttles, causing the reagents to hallucinate. Something that Amelia has warned the reagents not to inhale.
You need to try to stay awake in the shuttle. Don't inhale any more gas than you absolutely have to. You should be able to go 2 minutes holding your breath without passing out. Keep your head straight. Listen for my word. I promise you, I'm trying.
It says that after light but prolonged exposure to this chemical, Signala staff may themselves experience psychosis. An observational blackout period is suggested during preconditioning, which occurs during transit to the trials themselves. You'll notice that the guards that stand outside the trial shuttle now wear gas masks in order to prevent this exposure. It then finishes by stating that any staff who are significantly compromised by the psychosis gas will be considered a candidate for the experimental population. This is something that was mentioned in the XPOC classification files for the Pusher. These gas fiends are known to be former members of staff who succumbed to chemical exposure and were driven to psychosis. It's possible that the observational blackout period led to a gap in security that Amelia was able to expose. Throughout the under surveillance program, Amelia had the reagents listen to a broadcast of televisions inside the trial environment, and she had them collect schematics. Maps of different environments, and more crucially, schematics of the sleep room terminal from which reagents select their trials. She was planning to sabotage it, and she hacked the sleep room director's radio.
Jesus Christ, this might actually work. But only if we all go at once. There's Gabs and Murkoff security. Place is so awful, they think even we wouldn't go there. They underestimate how desperate we are. You're nothing Easterman tells you you are. Just be nothing. Be ready.
She also hacked the shuttle terminals too.
This is Amelia. Listen to me. Look for the date and be ready. Easterman's been preparing you for something incredible. Something painful. Impossible. Even if the only thing you learn in a slaughterhouse is how to be meat. But maybe that's how we get out of here.
Reagents would see her round the trial environment, sabotaging equipment, messing with Murkoff, and graffitiing the walls with anti-Murkoff messaging. She also left a date, April the 8th.
Wait for my word. Be ready. They're gonna pay for what they did to us. You only have to hold out a little while longer. Look for the date. If we all go at once, they can only kill so many of us. I hope you're hearing this. I hope I'm not throwing this all away.
Now this was a fourth wall breaking thing, as part 2 of Under Surveillance launched on the 8th of April. With everything set in what in-game is April 21st, Amelia's plan is a go.
We don't have long. If you're gonna make a run, do it now. It's finally time. Wake up, get the others, and go. Tell whoever you can. The more of us go, the better chances we all have. You can use the trial board to call a garbage shuttle. It can get you out. Security.
Waking up in the sleep room, the reagent leaves their room and all hell has been breaking loose. Items are strewn all over the place and there's clearly been some rioting going on. Murkoff security are standing, watching, or running around. Amelia has modified the sleep room terminal and it offers a question: to escape or remain. And upon clicking to escape, the reagent boards the shuttle. Amelia has sabotaged it so that the shuttle takes the reagent to somewhere different, taking advantage of the security flaws in the escalation program shuttle switching system. The reagent boards the chum bucket, but eventually comes to a stop and Amelia says there's a problem. She says that Murkoff are onto them and they have to leave, and good luck. The reagent is now heading away from the lathe facility and towards biohazard disposal. It's pitch black down there, but thankfully the reagent has their night vision, and they proceed through the tunnels. Hearing the screaming of reagents, our reagent continues on and spots other reagents down there too, some of them having gone insane. It's also here that Amelia has been sleeping and hiding. This side room is where she was plotting the escape and sabotaging the broadcasts from. But it seems that Amelia has left there in a hurry. They come across the large machine that Amelia had fixed, the REH, and they need to get it powered up. Managing to do so, increasing pressure and fueling it, the reagent gets on the belt and is fed into the machine. Amelia was right. It's a painful process, but the reagent survives and gets spat out with no ESOP or night vision. The reagent sees another reagent searching a body part on the ground for something. Making their way through the area, they see something disturbing, a heavy X-pop eating a corpse. Moving to a large open area with all sorts of props in there from different trials, the reagent finds a key on the ground but is chased by the heavy X-pop from before. This is Henrietta Grubbs. She's insane, she's angry and she's lonely. But she's still got one thing, and that is her love for Doris. She constantly cries out for Doris, checking bodies and barrels in the hope that Doris has not been killed. Whilst being chased by Henrietta, the reagent powers up different gates, including one in an area with toxic chemicals. Powering up the exit, the reagent moves on through it and escapes Henrietta. The way out is close. Very close, in fact, and the reagent sees the light. They are in some sort of old mine. There are barrels containing radioactive material in there, but the reagent emerges into the scorching sunlight of Arizona. Freedom. Signala is up on the mountainside in the distance. The reagent has come a long way for their escape, and they make their break for it, disappearing into the desert, and Amelia hopes that the reagent will tell the outside world about the things Murkoff are doing there at Signala. Whether or not this has the desired effect remains to be seen. Back at Signala, the staff are panicking, and memos are being sent out, alerting staff that an unknown number of reagents have escaped into Signala. Lethal force is permitted to the Murkoff security staff, who are ordered to capture or kill escaping reagents. As a result of Amelia's uprising and the subsequent escapes, Scarfiotti and Perry are going in on each other, with Perry accusing Scarfiotti of being complacent, since Amelia escaped one of the trials he designed. Scarfiotti responds by saying both Perry and Avianos have kept all this from him. Avianos stops them arguing and says that they need to stop the bleeding. But even at Signala there's a chain of command, and Scarfiotti says that the punch cards for the transit system are in Easterman's office, and of course, he's barricaded himself inside. Avianos expresses the need to get to him. That same morning though, Perry, along with Scarfiotti and Murkoff security staff, bust their way into Easterman's office and find him naked, covered in blood and feces, and screaming about all sorts of things, including the Skinner Man and the name Joel. They physically restrain him, and he has a seizure. He was moved to a hospital bed, and Perry resumes his search for Amelia. The following day, Avianos speaks with Easterman. He tells her that he knows that she was lying to him about his wife Irene and about Stanley, about his work and the therapy. She tells him that she knows he's not crazy, but mentions some of the things that he was saying. She wants to know where the punch cards for the shuttle system are, but Easterman first demands to be freed. He tells Avianos that he knows both her and Scarfiotti are setting him up to take the blame for Amelia's uprising. But he blackmails Avianos, telling her that he knows all about her relationship with Jameson Lawler. He says that if he goes down, he's taking her with him. Later, on that same day, Perry is speaking with Avianos, and she says that they're going to have to tell the board what happened, as they've lost too many staff who were killed, and far too many reagents who escaped for the board not to notice. Perry then asks if the board will shut them down, but Avianos then starts to laugh and says that the board know how much Murkoff are bringing in through their activities there at Signala, and they'll just want someone, no matter who it is, to be accountable for this mess. Perry mentions pointing the finger at the person that authorized the shuttle switching system for the escalation trial program. Avianos mentions that if Perry sorts this mess out, then he'll likely be rewarded with a promotion. The Avianos-Lawler love affair has a new development too, as Lawler was scheduled to visit for a conference. Avianos cancelled his conference though, due to what had happened at Signala. Lawler says that he's already told Sidney Gottlieb that he was going to visit Signala, and that Gottlieb was expecting a report on the Kress Chemicals. Avianos says that's been put on hold. After what Easterman blackmailed her with, it appears that she's trying to be more careful about her relationship with Lawler. Lastly, the figures report that Signala lost 23 ex-pops, 27 security staff, 4 of the science staff, 8 maintenance staff, and an unknown number of reagents. The report talks about an extremely dangerous ex-pop being loose in Signala, and one can assume they're talking about Henrietta here. In regard to Easterman, he seems coherent, focused. He quotes Joel chapter 2, which explains the rambling and his saying the name Joel whilst being restrained. For reference, Joel chapter 2 describes the Day of the Lord, being a time of judgment and devastation where an army would invade Judah after they'd turned their backs on God. An army of locusts, a fighting army, would attack, and God issued a promise of restoration if his chosen people turned back to him. And this is reflected in what Easterman writes next, as he laments the things that he's lost. His family and the people that he only wants to help, the reagents, have escaped from him. He writes as if his old self is dead, gone. He writes with a newfound clarity and says that since he's been destroyed and still lives, that he can do anything and that the trials are just the beginning. Since Easterman likes to view himself as a sort of god, this I guess links into what he quoted from Joel, and its implications are significant here, as he appears to be talking about God's wrath. This tells me that Easterman may be planning to go even farther and deeper into the therapy. At some point during the reagent escape, Amelia does a runner, and we're about to find out why. And this is through another exciting JT Petty and the Black Frog collaboration for the 5th issue of the Murkoff collection. During the escapes, Amelia had been chased by Murkoff's security team, and that included Clyde Perry. Clyde eventually tracked down Amelia after he realised where she was taking the reagents, and that was through the garbage chute. However, the sheer number of escaping reagents made it impossible for the Murkoff security and staff to stop them all, and a large number of them made it out into the world. Henrietta also managed to kill a number of the security staff and some reagents too, I'd wager. Murkoff, or Clyde, needed to stop the bleeding, so to speak. So he got a hunch and led some of the staff to a place where he'd previously found some red paint on a lever which changes over the tracks for the trial shuttles. Lo and behold, he catches up to her and pulls a gun on her, shooting her in the leg, and this incapacitates her. She attempts to crawl away, but Clyde tries to trash talk Amelia, who says that the moment Damon died, she'd already made her decision to die there at Signala. Clyde cruelly gloats that he was the one who killed Damon, and this enrages Amelia even further. She continues, to Clyde's bewilderment, to try and crawl away, but Clyde soon finds out why. He stepped on a blinding mine. Clyde has literally stepped right into Amelia's trap. From the red paint to the blind mine, all meticulously planned. Amelia gets up, grabs a brick, smashes Clyde in the head with it, and he falls onto the tracks. A distant rumbling confirms that a trial shuttle is hurtling down the tracks, and with Amelia grinning with delight, Clyde is pretty much torn in two by the shuttle. Amelia takes off running, but she runs right into Murkoff's staff and is beaten and drugged, with her passing out. But back with Clyde, as he lies stricken on the tracks, Easterman approaches. Clyde asks Easterman to get him out of there, but Easterman has no such desire to. He says that he thinks Clyde was planning to put the blame of the escape onto him, as he was the one who proposed the idea for the shuttle switching system for the escalation therapy program. After Amelia is captured, she is patched up, and Easterman says that she is to be an example to the other lab rats. He then pulls out a patient file on Henrietta. She's been captured too, and Murkoff have some more plans for her. Easterman says that they'll make her beautiful. And that brings the lore for Season 2 to a close. I'll have a video coming out when the Season 3 update drops, so keep an eye out for that one. But if you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you aren't already. Leave a comment below with what you think will happen in Season 3, but for now, take care, and I will see you in the next one.